Hello and welcome to our new monthly video series. I'm Hazel Burton. Later on, I'll be chatting to Bill Largent, one of our threat researchers. Before then, let's get the latest headlines from our Decipher colleagues, Dennis and Lindsay.
All right, thanks, Hazel. I'm here with my colleague Lindsay O'Donnell Welch. I'm Dennis Fisher. We have a couple stories to talk to you guys about this month. I think the biggest one, Lindsay, is the Okta breach, which happened a couple weeks ago now and is turned into one of those stories that I think is going to have quite a long tail going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Basically, the gist of the story is that on October 19th, Okta said that some threat actors had used a stolen credential to access its support case management system. And that allowed them to view files that were related to support cases uploaded by certain customers, which contained sensitive data like cookies, session cookies, and tokens. Okta said that the breach impacted 134 customers, which is less than 1% of its customer base. But some pretty big customers came forward, including 1Password, Beyond Trust, and Cloudflare, and said that they were impacted. Obviously, identity and access management services providers are a top target for threat actors because of the very sensitive data that they harbor. So it shows that, modern kind of identity based attacks can be very complicated. And for those end customers, this was an attack that originated outside of their environments. So complicated stuff.
Yeah, it's tough to defend against those. And I think the other biggest story in the last month or so is the executive order that the Biden administration put out on AI security and safety, which has become one of the bigger, I guess, buzzwords and topics in the security industry over the last year or so. And there's a few components to it, but one of the biggest things is they're trying to focus on the safety and security of the models themselves. And I think the problem that they're going to run into with this, and some of the experts that we talked to about it said as much, is that all those data models are owned by private entities such as Google and Amazon and Meta. And the government doesn't really have any insight or, power over those models and how they're being trained and how they're being used. So I think that's going to be an issue. And one of the other components that is probably going to have some issues is the EO calls for some external sort of red team testing of models and things like that. And I don't think there's a good way to test your way out of this problem. Like, these models are starting to ingest all this not great data that they've put out themselves. And so you run into this recursive data pollution problem that turns these models into, kind of polluted versions of themselves over a very short period of time. So
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how that works going forward and how much that actually gets implemented. Like most EOs, it takes some time. So
Yeah, one to keep an eye on for sure.
yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.
We're going to focus in on some of the biggest trends from the Talos Incident Response quarterly review. The full report is now on our blog, and I've asked Bill Largent to join me to talk about some of the most interesting findings. So welcome, Bill. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I think the starting point with this report is that there was quite a sharp rise in web application attacks in the last quarter. I think it was featured in nearly a third of all of our incident response engagements from the past 3 months, and that's up from 8% the quarter before. So what I'd like to talk to you about is, firstly, what do we mean by web application attacks, and how do they lead to further post-compromise activity?
Yeah. So, the web application attacks, in essence, are the ingress point. It's the way that they're getting into the environment, right? And then a lot of these that we've seen are kind of leveraging off-the-shelf tools once they're in to kind of establish connectivity, whether that's an off-the-shelf command and control or something like that. And then once they're in, we're seeing a lot of the same things we see before with lateral movement via the dual use tools that are, the built-in Windows tools. And so I was kind of surprised by the massive uptick in that as well. But I think the reality is simply that it was an opportune way to get an ingress point more than anything. And then the leveraging of those off-the-shelf tools kind of provided a great way to move once they were in.
Yeah. Okay. So the story is it's another way for them to get in, where the damage is being done is what they're doing once they're inside, maybe laying a backdoor for further activity. Some of the other trends I'd like to talk about is what's happening with ransomware. So the ransomware landscape has it's gone through quite an evolution in the past 12 months. We're seeing more extortion. We're also, saw the leaking of ransomware source code, either by accident or deliberately by some threat actors, which is introducing some more players into the ransomware landscape. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, but also we also saw the first case of the new ransomware variant, Blackbyte NT. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so we're seeing a huge uptick, not only, like you said, the leaked source code, like the Conti one, which we had a really fun blog on where the team were doing the translations, but also some of the off-the-shelf stuff where you could like get into ransomware via a service or something like that. So we've seen that. I found the Blackbyte stuff really interesting from the terms of analyzing it. It's all done in C++, which is kind of new. We're seeing them leverage the like a valid account, right? So they're getting in and leveraging a valid account. So probably there's some bit of reconnaissance in terms of finding someone via LinkedIn or a reused password or something that we see commonly. Once they're in, they're doing a lot of account creation to do their privilege escalation. So instead of like exploitation or something, it's more like creation and then escalating their privileges that way. And then again, just like we saw before, once they're in, they're leveraging the dual use tools to move internally, find that PII. And then like you pointed out, then they're double extorting, once they steal that PII.
Yeah. I think this brings us on to our next topic. What are threat actors doing once they're in? And, an increasingly in a trend is that they are using, anti-detection techniques to try and make sure that they go in undetected, and then they can do whatever they do once they're inside. We saw this with a new advanced persistent threat actor, Shrouded Snooper. That has been targeting telecommunications firms in the Middle East primarily. Could you talk a little bit about this APT and what it demonstrates about some of the larger trends that we're seeing, especially with this one it was a case of threat actors trying to evade detection by masquerading as legitimate security software components.
Yes, yeah. And I think for a lot of these threat actors, especially in the ransomware variant establishment, what they've kind of gone, what we saw well in the past, you remember, is they kind of would get in at smash and grab or get in and just encrypt everything that it touched, like the old school worms. And that really wasn't getting paid as much because people did have good backup strategies. We as a community kind of got better about, enabling those plans and stuff. And so now what the threat actors have to do is really work hard about living longer in the environment, right? And so that means quieter, that means hiding, or whether it's, using a lot of the Windows built-in tools, we're seeing a lot of that. Now, once like Shrouded Snooper got in, and then even the way they leveraged the command structure was, the HTTP portion listened for remote commands, right? It turned on a listening tool and would wait for the commands and kind of, and then they even truncated that later and did away with listening to certain amounts because they wanted to avoid detection, right? So they had a massive group and then shrunk it down, live longer in the environment. The pipe snoop version didn't even listen. It just looked for a pipe name command already on the device, right? So all of those things, in essence, I could talk all day about it. You could read the blog, and it's very fantastic. But that's the end game, is to live longer so they can steal the stuff. Once they steal the PII, then they'll run the ransom.
Yeah. So just to maybe wrap things up, based on what we've talked about, but also anything that you're seeing out there in the threat landscape at the moment, what would be your main advice to defenders who are watching?
Yeah, I mean, it's always easy to go to the building blocks of, ensuring you have patch updates and all of those things. For me, I think with the trends that we're seeing, especially like you said, that huge uptick in those web app attacks, it's very much a process for me of saying, okay, so if this is how we're evolving, let's take a long look and know, okay, let's really check account credentials, right? Make sure we've got two-factor auth across the board, right? So that we know, that we can't have someone leveraging an account that is, using a proper password and everything. It's those kind of things. It's also understanding when you have a host that has that PII, ensure that there aren't new accounts created on it. Ensure that you are validating the traffic that's on there. I think those are the main steps. And of course, like always, please patch everything and make sure that you are staying up to date with the trends. So read the blogs, listen to Beers with Talos. My gosh, you can learn so much. For me, even if I wasn't on this team, anytime Lorene or Matt Olney are speaking, I'm listening, right? Like that's how it works. And so that's another great recommendation in my opinion.
And the great thing is they know when you're listening.
Yes, exactly. I'm so
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Thank you so much, Bill. As Bill mentioned, there is a fantastic blog which goes into some great detail about some of the major trends that we've been seeing over the past 3 months. You can find that on blog.talosintelligence.com. Whilst you're there, if you're not already, please do subscribe so you get the latest news straight into your inbox. We will see you same time, same place next month for next month's update. Until then, do take care.